Okay, presumably this is all working. I guess we'll see whether it's working or not, right? I'm Chris from Airwindows. And here, in case I need to read my own notes. And welcome to the Airwindows live stream, such as it is. Let me fool around and get everything going. I have got, let's see now. The ability to focus. Oh, hi, Elheim. And I need to get the window capture up. So let's see what's wrong with that. Nothing's wrong. There you are. Boop. So I gotta be able to see my coffee. Oh no, can't get in the way of that. That would be terrible. Hey, David. So, yeah. Here we are. We are hanging out. And I can answer some questions and things. I don't know whether you missed last week. Oh, hey, Bo. Look, I can make your screen wiggle. There it is. So here, what we're going to do today is the usual Q&A thing, but you've got me in the middle of a period of acute reflection as far as what do I got to do to get my boat more steady and stable and carry on better on into the future rather than overcommitting and getting up to too much. So, but that's not really something that has to be discussed, other than I can tell you what I'm up for doing and what I'm not. I should probably I should be looking you in the eye. Chat. Hey, Mute Tourette's. So what I'm going to do, since we're not audio streaming or anything, I can shut off the preview so I'm not unduly distracted by continually trying to look at myself in the screen. That's the challenge when you do streams and things. And let's see. And I've got the chat available. Yeah, dude, there is nothing I can do about the YouTube thing. I trust them to be a complete nightmare and disaster. So, as far as not getting a bell, maybe it's because they don't think I'm very good. I really don't know. But, that said, hey, I'm still here as long as they let you actually log on to the stream, which is, I suppose, also a question, but that's something I haven't had to face yet. And I think there were, I think there was a Q&A week, but maybe not. Like last week was the week where I really just went splat and had to stop. So last week I think there was nothing until Wednesday when I've started doing a Hangout stream where me and some friends play Minecraft and or chat on TeamSpeak. So that is something that is going to happen because I'm doing it in such a way where rather than wearing me out, it is letting me sort of build up. But I think you may very well have not gotten a no Q&A or a Deed Music stream last week because there wasn't one. I was treating the situation I got myself into with some respect, and so I'm looking in sort of the long term there. So there was not, I don't think, a Q&A last week. If you saw less videos, there's a reason for that, because I wasn't doing them. So there's that, which is maybe not all that fine, but it's something that goes along with me having to revise stuff. Like, I got overcommitted, so I'm kind of trying to dial back to the things that seem like they're the most important things, and also other things that, like, I'm good at showing up for stuff. I'm good at showing up for stuff in a scheduled way, and so the timing of stuff isn't difficult, and it's actually good for me to have scheduled things going on. What really wasn't working out so well was kind of trying to do a deep dive, essentially like doing an entire essay but improvising it every week to a audience that either like maybe wasn't into it, or maybe was like continually wanting different things, or wanting me to do it from a different perspective, or stuff. And also knowing that the copyright holders and YouTube and all the social media services and stuff just basically wanted to stomp me into the ground for having the effrontery to do it. Because you're not allowed to share copyrighted audio. There's no such thing as fair use. So, yeah, I feel like that's something that I added onto everything else, and that's what caused the problems, but it's also something that wasn't a good idea. Like, I've been doing weekly plugins for 3 years solid without stopping. Or actually, no, there have been some bobbles at times, but on the whole, I've been running at that rate, and it's been basically fine. It's a bit of a drag, but it's basically fine. I'm thinking maybe this coming week, what I can do, since I'm kind of intimidated at figuring out what's wrong with Compress Saturator, is take yet another week. And in this case, I'll use the firmware for chord organ, which is essentially done, and I'll release that. And I think like virtually nobody is going to find that useful, because it's a very obscure thing. But I think it's cool. And I've been trying to do it parallel to all the rest of the work, so I might as well like give myself a week by going like, okay, here's an elaborate demo how to do this thing. And maybe here's how I did it. Here's what you do to do stuff like that yourself. We'll look at the code. We'll do a bunch of things. And that'll be next week, is literally the alternate firmware for a modular synthesizer part that most people don't have. Because it's like, well, it's been just as much work as anything else. So yeah. I do have a pile of stuff that I need to do with regard to getting that up and running properly. There's some stuff that I'd like, for instance, I mentioned working on kits and things. And the Turing Machine is actually a kit by the same people who do radio music and stuff. And I really like them and approve of them and want to help them. So I would like to make some of those. And I also like their instructions. What you might or might not be able to see over here, I'm digging into something else, which is going to prove challenging. This is one of the boards, the control board, for two distinct Erica Synths baseline synthesizers. And the reason I like this less than the Music Thing modular stuff is, as you can see, they give you all this stuff, but they gave me all of this stuff in a single baggie. So I gotta go and figure out what all these values are and look them up with the little color code reference, and I gotta use the reference for that because I'm not gonna remember it. And then I got a solder room in, and they've got all of these parts labeled by the value of part on the board, which I guess means you can buy just the board and go like, okay, I need this many 200K resistors, and then go and get those. But the Music Thing modular ones sort of have them labeled up, and they have this detailed instruction thing, like a PDF you can get, that basically decides like, okay, solder these in, then solder these in, make sure to do it like this, and they walk you through it with pictures, and it makes it real trivially easy if you're fairly good at soldering. So the music, and in fact Eric has since are giving up on doing that, possibly because of the same thing I'm observing, which is they haven't made it like dumb simple enough. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to do it, but it's an additional layer of burden that I didn't really want to face, and other people might have had similar reactions to that. I think it depends. Like, my guess is that Music Thing stuff is unusually good. So again, this is one of the reasons I would like to encourage them. Also, just so as you know, as far as modular synthesizer stuff is concerned, Behringer is jumping into that world. So, if you like building kits, and I can make the whole like Music Thing modular based thing of you know, these radio musics and chord organs, you can put drums and things on there. I'll give you drums to put on them. I have drum samples that are pre-designed to be dithered using like my best dither to go in the radio music. It is literally dithered to what the radio music puts out, which is not actually, I can't actually do that with chord organ, or probably can't, maybe I haven't gotten there yet. Chord organ is using the Teensy built-in audio libraries, which I don't think dither their output and stuff, so there's a limit to, oh, do you think I look like a boss? I'm wearing like blue jeans and the flannel shirt. Maybe I'm a boss from Canada. That'd be cool. I'm close to Canada. I'm in Vermont. Also, I see Bo is shouting me out with the flag. It says Airwindows. Have the review analysis videos on yet? I don't understand. On yet is not a question, and I don't know which review analysis videos you refer to. So, yeah, re-ask that in some rephrased way. I hope the camera is literally focused on the back curtain today, because it needs to also be focused on me, but I'm assuming that it probably more or less is. Maybe I can wah with my hands and fiddle with it. You know, there may come a day when I actually get an autofocus lens for this. It might be a while. Like right now my intention is more drawn towards like the modular stuff, because, you know, seriously jumping into that is what kind of gives me heart, and I get more positive. And if I need to take a couple of days for a mental health break or whatever, I'm usually going to be building something or doing some kind of tinkering with instruments. Like you can, well, actually no, you can't, but if you weren't there, like here, tell you what. Ooh. You were not there, so you can probably see the Rickenbacker over there. I'll see momentarily when it shows up on the live example. But you can probably see the Rickenbacker over there, and I did something with it just recently, which is, that is a double cable coming off of it. So what I did was I replaced the switch and the wires, and here, you can come back. I still love you, come back now. The wires coming out of that, it's a stereo jack, and I set it up so the bridge pickup is what you get when you plug a regular cable into it, and then the ring of a stereo gives you the bass pickup, and they're coming off of what connected to the jack, so the volume and tones work independently for each side. And if I do that, what I can do is run the bass pickup into what my Rhodes is plugged into, which is a preamplifier, and then run the bridge pickup into my little guitar amp, not even the pedal board, but just directly into the amp for, you know, cleanest possible sound, but definitely some overdrive because it's a fairly hot pickup. And if I do that, I can mix those two things together, although I have to flip the phase in one of them, and get a pretty dead-on, like, prog rock Rick bass tone, a very, like, Chris Squire ready kind of tone. So that combined with me setting up rototoms in my drum kit, the same drum kit that I haven't been using all the time I've been doing this modular stuff, means that there is several prospects. And one of them is a prospect of me actually thinking up some music that's in a different genre and doing that. I don't know whether it would include singing. I'm capable of singing, but I have problems thinking of anything that I feel like is worth being sung. And the other one is, if I do that, I'm going to be primarily interested in mixing in analog using the setup that I put together, but it would also open things up for me demonstrating mixing in the box. And people are wanting that a lot more than most of these other things. Like, a lot of this stuff is just to make me feel good, or because it's what I care about, or it's what I'm modeling the plugin stuff after. And I never really feel that the plugin stuff can really live up to it, which is one of the reasons why, you know, when I posted Seriously, I called it a failure, because the guy who essentially commissioned it has really good ears. Like, if you ever listened to Beauty Pill, which I certainly endorse doing. I like that guy's music a lot. And he is a very interesting, very smart man and doesn't blow smoke for people. So he was looking for a Hughes SRS replacement. And what he got was like, well, this is good. I like it for its own thing, but I was still wanting the SRS replacement. And I may not actually be able to do that for him. It might be better for somebody else to do it. But I do tend to feel that software and plugins can't really quite make it up to the level of musicality of actually good analog stuff. Let me have a look at chat for a second, because I'm just sort of reporting on what happened with Seriously and stuff. And in a very significant way, it's not a fail. It's only a fail because it was done out of love to try to help this guy out, who I really like his music a lot, and so should you. And, well, Time Magazine does, so he probably doesn't need you to be liking it. But I don't really think plugins can quite rise to that standard, so it doesn't surprise me terribly if, well, like, good luck going and finding a Hughes SRS repairman. It's like, oh no. Very possibly what's going to end up, like, I would consider it a victory if he sent the silly thing to me, because he's talking about doing it thinking I'm going to be able to exactly clone it if he sends it to me. And that could still happen, because this is also the kind of guy he is. He would do that. He would do that. But I don't feel that I'd be able to clone it. But what if I was able to fix the buzz? I don't know. I would worry that I would just break it worse. That has happened. I actually had, this is one of the secret things that didn't actually end up happening, is I literally got a Roland tape echo, a Roland space echo, and then tried to demagnetize it and it died. I have a test sound of the tape echo in its, like, grungiest condition, where I ran a lot of test tones through it and got a real sense of, like, what its warble was like. And that was all ready to be studied. That was all ready to dive into. But then I couldn't measure and work with it in working condition, because when I tried to clean and degauss it, it died. And I would be afraid that that would happen with the Hughes device, of which you can't get them, basically. So that would be scary. On the other hand, I feel pretty confident that if I could take the lid off and look at it and figure out if there was something obviously wrong. Because sometimes like hum problems and things like that are when something has come loose. In fact, I had a problem with my actual playback DAC that I use for critical listening of stuff, including the audio, the headphone type thing, is the Lavry DA10. It started to give me problems. I thought it was going to die on me. So I took it apart. Just like I took apart the AD10 that I got and posted it on Instagram. I didn't post the DA10 on Instagram, although I could have. Maybe that was a missed opportunity. And I started trying to take apart the power supply board and noticed that two of the internal screws holding the power supply board down were loose. Not only that, there was a little solder area underneath one of the loose screws where clearly it was supposed to make an electrical connection with the case. So I went, and experimented with like what happens if I just tighten up all these loose things, because it was like unlocking and refusing to work. And I did that and it started working again. So I fixed the Lavry, which I'd been using for many years, because through just sort of heat up and cool down cycles over many years, the internal stuff came loose. And you know, the same thing could happen with the Hughes. It's going to be just as old, or if not older. Actually, it will definitely be older. So I would consider it a complete victory if this guy sent the Hughes to me, as he might do, and I wasn't able to clone it, although I suppose I could measure it, and I could A/B it and adjust things relating to it. But if I wasn't able to clone it, but I was able to fix it so he had a working hardware one again, I would count that as a complete victory. I would be fine with that. Although it would be a bit of a downer for Chad if he really wanted the exact clone on the laptop so that he could mix on the laptop. This is somebody who can work with the most highfalutin, fancy, analog, precious studio gear, but also mix one of the songs off of Beauty Pill Describes Things as They Are on a laptop at a coffee shop, and you can't necessarily tell which is which, because his aesthetic does many interesting things, and it's all very intentional. So let me have a look at the chat again. So what Bo meant by the analysis videos on yet, what you should do is set that up with me in advance, like email me, talk to me in chat. Don't be talking to me about that on the Wednesday, because we're just going to be talking about Minecraft and hanging out. If you want to show up for that, any of you can show up to that chat. What I've been doing is I've been giving the IP address for the Minecraft server out verbally over my mic, and I've been giving the server address for the TeamSpeak server and the password also out verbally over my mic, although I could also tack it into the Patreon so that if you're Patreons, then you'd be able to see that easily. But it's like low volume enough that it hardly matters if I do that. It's like if people come and raid and try to blow things up, it's like, well, we only just got started, so we're doing this now, apparently. And we really don't particularly care, so it's like there's not much to lose. And what we stand to gain from doing that, part of what I've been doing with Airwindows all this time, and it's become very obvious, is like I make new friends of people who are a lot like me. I was talking with this, I can call him a kid because I'm more than twice his age, this kid the other day who might be in the chat for all I know, I'm not sure, who's getting into mastering and wanted to ask me like, which of your plugins are for mixing and which of your plugins for mastering? And I was like, oh, no, Grasshopper, that's not how that works. It's about being able to make connections with people and encouraging people to make connections with each other. So on the one hand, I can do these streams and answer technical questions for until 12:37. Actually got another minute or so. And I can do that, but then we can also get together. Like, I've got friends I've met in real life through that Minecraft-y type stuff and through going to conventions and things like that. You know, we live lives. You can't actually... Oh, and I'm fiddling with the cable to mess with you. The reason you're hearing it is because I'm running the compression, and the compression is lifting detail out of the nothingness. We have the capacity to make connections. Like, a bunch of people are friends with the muzzle on the grounds. He was hanging around and pestering me and basically being me 20 years ago, and showed up on the stream, and I was like, oh, hey, this guy's a friend of mine. If he's kind of awkward, deal with it, or we'll just try to work with it. Because he's like me, he's a friend of mine. A lot of my friends are sort of weird characters, and you'll be seeing that probably on the game stream on Wednesdays, which is very much more about just me hanging out rather than working, because it's really hard for me to stop working sometimes. That's what happened yesterday, and the reason that the video went up late was I knew I needed to do... I had done the adding of the Q control too seriously, and I knew I needed to do a video for that, and the kid getting into mastering had called me up, so I wanted to return that call, and then I started working on the chord organ stuff, this generative music thing, which I feel like I'm getting into something where people have not gone yet. So it's just as legit of a pursuit as any of the plugins, really. And I fired it up, because it had been more than a week since I played with any of it. And I had felt like the chord organs weren't working right. They were playing like extraneous or wrong notes. I started running it through some tests, and I discovered, oh boy, are they ever making wrong notes. They were making notes based on like the original root note of the chord, if the initial chord was always on the same thing set by the other. Like, my whole thing is spelling out chords using the programmability of the device. You put in a little SD card, and it has a file in it, and it looks up chord shapes off of the file, which normally is like, okay, major, minor, seventh, so on. And I needed to be like, okay, those chords need to be C major, A minor, and so on. And it started throwing the C in on everything. And there was nothing I could do to make it stop. So it became hour after hour of like reburning these little flash things, which in many ways is like what I do. It's like, yes, plugins. Yes, I'm always going to be interested in giving people software that they can have for free, because it's really important to give people tools when all they've got is like a laptop or something like that. That's also why I'm so committed to backwards compatibility. Like, if people, all they can have is a laptop from 2007, and do I throw you under the bus? Oh, no, I do not. But I'm also interested in some of the hardware hacking people can get into, where you can do, like, I was getting heavy into building stuff on perfboard and wiring it up yourself, and I expect that I'm probably going to still be interested in that and still be getting into it. It'll be other streams maybe, or maybe I can come up with a way to do that for like my Sunday video post. If it gets stale, just constantly throw in plugins, because honestly, by now you've got the plugins that you need, and it's more like repackaging them or filling in little details here and there, or upgrading stuff. Like, I can improve the roll-offs of some of the bass-oriented things. But there will come a time when it's time to start digging into some other things that you can also do. And the chord organ is based off of a thing called the Teensy, which means that if you build one of these DIY kits, technically you could just get Teensies for about $10, because you can buy these things for like $10. And if you power them and have a USB cable and a computer to plug them into, you can program them just the same way, or indeed program them with the firmware that's openly available from stuff like radio, music, or chord organ, and then wire up your own circuitry to support it, and then go to that. Yeah, Ahmed, you're right. The 2-tape upgrade is coming. So there are many things that can be done regarding that kind of stuff, and that continues to be real interesting to me. Although putting out the plugins or extending the plugins, see, here's another thing that's going on that you might not know about, so I'll tell you about it for the first time here today. I have gotten a very interesting email that may or may not lead to something neat. Namely, a fellow wrote me asking me if he could port all of the Airwindows plugins, I don't believe he really means all of the Airwindows plugins to VCV Rack. Now, I've been talking about that. If I was to start fooling with it, like on the Monday stream or something like that, because maybe it can become a thing where if you really want a stream dedicated to analyzing your music, arrange that with me ahead of time and we'll do it as a Monday stream. Otherwise, it just ends up me telling my life story and stuff. And I can cover questions that come up fairly quickly, and people who want to badly enough call me up on the phone. And if things are going reasonably well, I can return the call, and that's another thing I did the other day. So, as far as don't mind me. You must understand that I'm a little scattered. That's what I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, and it's not going to blow over instantly. I am working valiantly on taking care of myself and getting back together. And, you know, you guys talking about one of the neat things about Q&A, but also frustrating to me. It's not always frustrating, but sometimes it is people will ask about things like the Dirty Connection plugin, which I think maybe was Ahmed's baby. Or Bo wants the sorting algorithm, because I figured out you could take everything within a zero crossing and sort it and then divide it either way, and it would tend to make things more into sine waves or whatever. And yeah, that's neat. Unfortunately, doing that beyond the edges of a buffer poses problems, and I don't see the answer to it just yet. So since you guys are seeing me continually not doing it, because it sounds like if I'm not getting the answer intuitively, I don't have many other resources. Like the stuff that I do comes from me putting together little points of inspiration here and there, and I'm lucky to have those. I also have made it my business to continue having those, like on a weekly basis, forever. So as long as I don't overextend, I feel like I can continue to do that, because that's the practice I'm in. I am practiced at letting myself come up with that stuff. And I'm not the only person who's ever done something like that. For instance, there is an advertising exec. I have no idea whether he's still alive or not. This is from back in the 60s and 70s and stuff. Fellow named David Ogilvy. And he was this famous advertising executive, ran a company called Ogilvy and Mather. And he was behind a bunch of advertisements that were cool, weird, different, and unusual. And in a way, that's kind of inspiring, because some of the stuff that he did violated the norms of what one normally does, very similarly to the way that I do. So you could say that Airwindows is, to some extent, owes itself to the Ogilvy and Mather advertising agency and their choices, because they did things like early advertising for Volkswagen. And early advertising for Volkswagen took the Beetle, basically, and just sort of played with the concept, did weird things with it. You know, there was a headline, "Ugly is only skin deep." And yeah, I would imagine Ogilvy Pad, because he was a grown-up man back in the 60s, so. They did advertisements for, I think, Dewar's Scotch or something like that. Or just stuff that, instead of doing the usual advertising sexy people with the big headline and it's blah, 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 they did stuff where it's column after column of text. Like they did advertisements for Rolls-Royce, where they're like, it's as if it was an article back in the day when that was just not done. Oh, okay, well, he was praising their work anyhow. And I do think Ogilvy was behind some of the stuff where they were doing like column after column of copy. And they're explaining things like, you know, they had a headline for Rolls-Royce of like, you know, at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this Rolls-Royce is the ticking of the electric clock. And the Rolls-Royce engineers got wind of this advertisement. Oh, we've got to do something about that bloody clock. Stuff like that, violating the concept. And Ogilvy wrote a book called On Advertising, which is actually quite good. And one of the things that he talked about was that he consciously built into his schedule and his way of life things which for him helped him stay in touch with a creative flow so that he could continue coming up with intuitive ideas. And he said, "I am almost incapable of rational thought, but I stay in touch with my subconscious and the ways in which I can get new ideas in a timely fashion." So he'd go for long walks, he'd take vacations. You know, he's like, "I'm on good terms with John Barleycorn." Well, that doesn't work for me. But for him, apparently that's what he did. So he did stuff. You know, a modern person might be like, "I do microdoses of acid regularly." Again, that's not for me, but people have various ways of doing that. And I have to respect that in myself. So let me see now. Let me have a look at chat. And I think one of the things I was going to say, particularly regarding the sorting algorithm thing, is I can have that described as a concept or run across it as a concept and describe what it would sound like, which is not necessarily all that useful. I mean, it's like, that's kind of like filtering or kind of like making a different waveform, but it's not necessarily going to be a magic bullet. It might be distinctly different enough that there's some coolness factor to it, but point being, I can describe what it would sound like and talk about it rather like inspiringly, but the actual code of how do you get beyond these buffers, or how do you work with this kind of thing where you're not making really horrible artifacts on a regular basis, making it sound like it's being frequency modulated with like the data bus inside your computer, because that would sound bad. And the thing about that is I can't necessarily do that, but if I can define the problem, my brother Dan can always do it. He is capable of that kind of rational thought. So if I pose him a problem like that, his whole way of life and his whole everything that he does is based around he'll be able to solve the problem. He'll be able to come up with the answer. And so that becomes more a matter of, because one of the things that I'm needing really badly is I'm going to get into spending some of January, and granted there's a limit to this, but I'm going to spend some of the beginning of the year not being in touch with my family, because the holiday season had me very much on the hook for being in touch with everybody, helping people to get along with each other to some extent anyhow. It's not formally my job, but I was thanked for that most explicitly, because like I can get on with everybody in my family, but they can't necessarily get on with each other, and that's a heavy burden sometimes. and one that I don't feel like dealing with. So as far as having my brother do stuff, it's like I can't pay him. He has way more money than me. And this is after, like, you know, my mom and dad passed away and I was able to do things like get some of the analog gear that I want or that I care about. And you know, Dan is still so much more wealthier than me that there is no possible way that I could pay him to do anything. It would be absurd to him. It would be insulting to him. And also there's no way that I could afford to do anything like that. So basically we're just spending time. We just hang out. And we hang out at a pretty regular basis, like maybe a couple of times a month even. And for me, that's a fairly large amount of social interaction. And I basically hear how he's doing and stuff. Sometimes I even talk about stuff that's interesting me, and he hangs in there with me long enough to understand it, which is challenging. And then we do like programming projects together. And that's a whole other thing, because I enjoy pitching ideas, and he's able to grind out some of these ideas very much. We're only just getting to the point where it's like he actively would like me to pitch ideas and steer what he's doing with them so that we can make the games that we're making to be a more interesting and engaging, or at least an unusual and unexpected game. Because before, he thought he could define the thing and then do it just like that. Like, you know, we're going to do Rogue now. And then he would do Rogue, and there was no real room for me to do anything interesting with it. And then he'd finish doing it, and it's like, okay, now I have Rogue. And then he would be not interested because he already had Rogue. Somebody already programmed that. So there's finally a space for me in his creative process. And his rational process has always been able to get places that I can't. So it becomes a prioritizing thing. It becomes like, you know, do I ask him to help me with the sorting algorithm thing? Just as a general, like, how do I come up with this concept? What can I do to make that work? Or do I ask him to help me with how do you dig into the code and figure out how to make, like, VST GUI work? Because this is somebody who could get VST GUI and audio units in Cocoa to work by, like, digging into the frameworks, digging into the libraries, and analyzing them and figuring out how they work. That's not really how I function. So yeah. It becomes a matter of how much of Dan's time do I want to waste fooling around with this kind of stuff that is useless, it only helps me. And it's like, I'd like him to help me, but mostly I hear how he's doing and I focus on the stuff that he's interested in, because that's just kind of how he rolls. You know, being a working programmer and all. My whole family is more than a little bit like that. Everybody was. My mom was like that as well. So, yeah. Let me scan the chat, because it's scrolling to where, yeah. Mm-hmm. Huh. Ah, Ahmed. You see, that makes sense to me. I'm reading the Ahmed thing where it's like, the reason we ask things, the living hell out of you, is you're the only one who ever did things like that and is also generous enough to listen to our weird requests. Well, the neat thing, like, people ask stuff, and some of it I think is valuable, and some of it I think maybe not so much. And then sometimes I can come up with a way to do it or not anyway, and ideally what happens is somebody comes up with a thing that they want to see happen. Oh, and my brother's health is doing fine. He has not had any further strokes. He has lost like 80 pounds in a year. Or not even a year. The guy is a beast as far as determination is concerned. And it gets really telling. I mean, that really tells you something about him, because back in the day, he just seemed like this sort of opinionated bully kind of person who had to have everything his own way and held everybody to these demanding things. But we have seen him engage with this health thing and engage with like needing to do a diet and stuff with this inhuman determination, which is way beyond what normally humans are able to come up with. And I think that's pretty cool. He's like a superhero in his own kind of way. So, you know, I respect that. That's very cool. That's also a good way to get yourself into a stroke, is to be that hard driving that you're like, grr! And if I can have any influence on just the ability to kind of lighten up, if you can even understand the concept, then that'll be positive, because I could be saving his life. I don't know. But we're all more than a little bit like that. This is why I have had to take such a striking angle on revising what I'm doing and dropping some of this stuff. Because it's like, yeah, I'm cut from the same cloth. I don't get to just push myself hard and do everything everybody asks of me, because I'll break and there's nobody to fix me. So I got to take responsibility for that myself, and so I'm doing that. But let me see now. Yeah. Bo studying advertising. Yep. Yep. It's all very interesting. Bo drove a Carmen Ghia. Oh, I'm so envious. Those are adorable. Yeah. Oh, you still have the Carmen Ghia. Oh, those are adorable. You find them all like reconditioned and stuff. The gleaming paint, and it's as if it was a car in Cuba. Well, bear in mind the work ethic is like the Protestant work ethic, and there are ways in which it is a toxic behavior. It all depends upon how you handle it. It all depends upon how you interact with other people, and to what extent you're being civilized versus what extent you're being just warlike and bullying about it. Because if you like stomp all over other people and go, you have inferior work ethic and you suck, then you're just kind of making them feel bad, not necessarily for any good. And sometimes like I probably would be dead if I had literally the same ethic that Dan has, because my environment is less protected, less nurturing and stuff. So the stress level is way higher. And, you know, also me being a recovering addict, I have to not drink or use or anything like that. I could easily get into a zone where I would just stroke myself out super hardcore. And for that reason, I have had to learn to lighten up, and I'm only beginning to learn. There's a lot I still don't know about it. It's becoming obvious to me that I need to take a couple of levels and chill. And that's fine. It's legit. But you know, it's daunting to think about that and go, that's not a joke. That's literally true. You know, for my own protection, I have to learn to chill and take things more lightly, because I'm not going to be lacking. And work ethic is a whole other thing, because I've spent a lot of time being all procrastinating and stuff, but I'll be procrastinating while having all of these flaky ideas, and I've always filled notebooks upon notebooks with that kind of stuff. And then I got into a line of work where I can start applying that, and you know, it's like, here, the thing that I whipped out. I was going to show this to people, I think, the last live stream, and never did, and then I spent a week without one. I whipped this out on the Seriously stream. I took this and printed it. This is something that could be interesting in a bunch of different ways. And oh, and I'm seeing some questions that I want to ask before I get into this. I will explain this because I think this is a whole series of cool things. Yeah. David, if that kid, his name is Aiden, does show up in the stream or something like that, you should definitely, you know, go like, oh, hey, call me up. I like talking about stuff like that. you're fairly on par as far as your technical understandings of stuff. So you could probably have interesting conversations / arguments, whatever. Supplements or nootropics, I can tell you what I'll do. I drink coffee, because I still drink coffee. If I had to stop that, I'd probably be drinking like chai tea, which I also do. Sometimes I'll take a baby aspirin, which is a common doctor-oriented thing for just lowering your blood pressure. And I treat it as like helping to sort of prevent myself from stroking out or having heart attacks and stuff like that. And as far as like vitamins and supplements and all that kind of stuff, I have some co-op like getting older person vitamin supplement, not quite Geritol, but it's the crunchy granola version of that as a multivitamin. And I also have cod liver oil pills and these sort of gel capsule things. And so I have those things. I do not know what nootropics even are, but I'm a little worried about some of that stuff because supplements and nootropics can be anything from that to like nomming on magic mushrooms or microdosing on LSD as a supplement, like brain aid. And there's all different angles to that, but I have to be careful about psychoactives because that's not how I roll. There is a Grayson's asking, would you ever get into mixing someone's music, engineering work, if they're present? That's the thing. You'd have to be able to come here or be on stream. That's another possibility. I could very well be able to do something by mixing something like on the board. I could even do it in analog, but live streaming it and having the person listen in over the stream, which would be kind of restrictive, but on the other hand, it would give you a sense of what's going on. But I have to have the person there giving me continuing feedback, because if I do stuff on my own, it winds up just being sort of like artistic stuff of who knows what, and it'll take me a long time to develop what direction I'm going in, and it doesn't necessarily serve the artist or musician whose music it is. That's why they have to be present to give a running, it has to be a dialogue. When I have the dialogue, it works great. I've done that before. I could do that now better than ever, but I need to have the person there. That is the one thing. Meditation is something I have looked into before. Sometimes I can touch on that. I have to approach it pretty formally. Like I have to do a proper Zen thing of like, okay, identify the kind of thought, label it, put it aside somewhere. Because I will keep spouting off ideas and stuff, because that's the way that like my brain is very much trained to keep doing that at all times. So so there's that. It is a very appropriate suggestion for me, though. That's something that I have to continue being aware of. I also do exercises, but as usual, I have jacked things up a little bit, because what I do is like 10 of a bunch of different exercises and then 10 more of the same exercises, like 2 iterations of all these things, like push-ups with my feet up on the bed so it's at a steep angle, and sit-ups and all manner of stuff like that. I can even do pull-ups now. I wasn't able to last year. And so I was doing 10 of all of those things. So I decided for 2020 I would do 12 of all of those things, which I have done once now. And then on Sunday I blew them all off. I normally try to do that like 4 times a week. But I've had to just sort of chill out, because there are times when it's like, now it's 2:30 in the morning and I really need to be asleep, and I've been doing all these other things because I just got hooked onto them, and I'm supposed to also now do a round of physical exercises, so I've had to let go of that to some extent. I won't go a whole week without doing any of it, because I'm afraid that I'll just sort of wither away and not be able to do them anymore. But I have added that, so that is something that I do. Ahmed mentioned something which I've considered, which is, can you mix your own song for a live stream? Well, I don't do songs, so that's a bit of a problem. I've been inventing sort of a genre of music which is far from new, but I'm trying to get it into a place that particularly signifies to me. And it's what I've been doing on all of those live streams from Tuesdays, which I don't think are going to start right up again, but I could get back to them at some point. And the point of those is disciplining myself to sit down, turn all the synthesizers on, and just start doing something. And I've been doing this during times when, like, my gear was messed up enough where I was trying to run everything off of those Arturia keysteps. Turns out Arturia are jerks too, so I'm not sure that I wouldn't want to encourage them all that much. But I was trying to wire those into each other to do elaborate sort of key change things, and they weren't key changing in the way that the current circle of fifths oriented things are. And the key steps would get stuck. I would be trying to play music and have them be like live looping for me, and notes would just get stuck on. And so I have all these SoundCloud things out there, like a year's worth, like more than 50 SoundCloud things, each of which are about 2 gigabytes in size. You can download the high res. And a bunch of them start off with just the sustaining synthesizer noises of various kinds, like twee, and it'd be like, okay, I guess you intended that. Well, no, it was just the synthesizers breaking, but I was doing it live, so I just rolled with it. And one of the things I'd considered, and there are two ways this could be done, is doing the Tuesday live stream and firing up this mic, which is running through the board. So that board is live right now. I could be running the music live stream, and the only difference is if I hit this button, what it does is switch over to the Rhodes. So I can't have the Rhodes and the mic at the same time. But one idea was doing what I would call the tubular bells approach, which is starting to do this sort of music, like do something and then do a running dialogue of here's what I'm doing now and why. But there's another possibility, which I don't have the gear for yet. But I wouldn't say it was impossible. The other possibility is getting additional hardware. I'm getting so drowned in hardware, it's hilarious. But by the way, if you want to hear old school Chris Rock songs, then go to crushallboxes.com, because it's all up there. I put my entire history of music up there. I don't think anybody actually listens to it. It's fine. But all that stuff can be found there. It's a lifetime of music recordings and mixes and such of various kinds, including stuff that I did with other people. Like there's my my childhood, not childhood friend. I actually got visited by Eric, my childhood friend, which was amazing because it reminded me that I had a friend when I was a child. But the college friend, Pete Mladeneo. Pete was a really weird character. We were all incredibly heavy into drugs, so we made this really druggy band that was also kind of progressive rock. And he's a very Jersey guy, so he, he had this sort of like Bruce Springsteen meets Frank Zappa attitude. It was amazing. And yeah, he's dead. He continued to be into drugs when I stopped, and eventually there's this police report somewhere saying that there's this guy was picked up for trafficking in heroin, and then he died, and that's basically how he went out, which is sad. But before then, I caught up with him because he was in town or was passing through, and he was interested in whether I could record music for him. And I was like, hell yeah. So I had all of my weird stuff getting going. I had an even stranger rig than now, but it included things like a large steel plate serving as like a plate reverb, except for that I had a microphone built into the middle of it, and just all manner of stuff. And a electronic drum kit that was a whole million little wooden practice pads with the rubber on them, with piezo pickups, and on a elaborate copper pipe framework made in a sort of curving shape, so that I could have lots of trigger inputs running into an Alesis D4. And I ended up getting a DM5, which it didn't like as well. It doesn't trigger as well. And the sounds were supposed to be better, and it didn't like the sounds as well either. But, so the drums of this thing were this demented little conglomeration of strange copper tubing in bizarre sculpture with practice pads dotted all over it. And we did an album, because he was still writing songs just as he had in college, but he was working with the band, and they were doing cover songs and playing bars and stuff, and nobody wanted to hear his music, and I still did. So before he died, I was able to do an album with him, and that was very rewarding. It was challenging, it was difficult, but it was very rewarding too. I did indeed make my own drum pad, so can you. Get a bunch of little piezo chips and solder wires to them, and then put them on something. Pretty much anything. Hey, Gemini Drive just showed up. Want to say thank you for the amazing plugins. Hope you're taking care of yourself. That's a solemn duty. I'm doing my best. It's going to be a lot of work to it, but I will keep it going as far as the taking care of myself. And people who want to join me in that can join me on Wednesday if they like playing Minecraft or talking. That's something that's going to continue to be available, and you can also dial in. I'll have it set up so that I can see the chat, so there's that too. And then you can, dial in if you have a headset and stuff, and join us in TeamSpeak too if you like. We will just see how all that works out. I mean, the Minecraft server is pretty safe from being messed with because it's off. I'm only turning it on when we're streaming on it. And the TeamSpeak does stay up and running at all times, but I think I have more resources as far as being able to block or control it and stuff. So there is that. So Mute Tourette's, that album is on Crush All Boxes, and it is under the name of Peter Frook, because Pete Mladoneo went by Peter Frook, F-R-O-O-K, and that was actually the name of our band in college, was the Frook, or Frook Indemnity, for no particular reason, just because we were on drugs, And you can, if you're clever with HTML, you can download everything, but failing that, you can listen to everything. And the files are not obfuscated. You just got to figure out how to download them from the server. But you should be able to get that. I don't have download links built into it. I'm probably not going to go and add them because that's a lot of work. So just work on like deep linking into it, downloading the songs out of there. So let's see now. Infinity Affirmation Audio, as you're very interested in what I think of Acoustica audio plugins. Are they good emulations? Well, I can't tell you whether they're great emulations or not. They're certainly complicated and a lot of people like them. But what I can tell you is, if I'm not mistaken, that's the same like the Nebula guys. And that is Zaphod. And Zaphod, also known as Giancarlo, is like one of the only people in the whole world that's actually helped me get rolling with the plugin designing stuff. Zaphod helped with the getting the VSTs working. He had some useful comments that me and my brother were able to run with, and we got up and running thanks to that. And so, in a sense, you owe the acoustic audio guy a debt of gratitude for getting me turned on to VST and getting it right, because he helped. Most people wouldn't. So, major props to Acoustica on the ground of that. As far as the sound quality of them, it's going to be one of those things where it's like it's applying a really detailed, complicated color, and it's also doing a lot of processing. So that's a two-edged sword. That is not my dynamic. That's not the way that I do stuff. So, you know, you can be into that or not, depending upon how your taste for digital audio is concerned. There's pluses and minuses to it all. As near as I can tell, I would say that it's comparable with other people in the same area. Like if you put Acoustica up against like Slate, I would say they were at least on par. As far as, you know, you can't come around and, oh, Slate stuff is way better than the Nebula. It's like, no, they're in the same ballpark. They're doing the same stuff. And it's interesting to see how that stuff works out. It might not be what I do, but it is still interesting. Yeah, Grayson, I don't know if there's going to be a next Evergreen. There could be. It's not going to be this month, that's for sure. And we'll see. It would be within the subset of those are the records that I've got. My problem there is that I feel there's no place I can do that where I can't safely put those up on the internet anywhere. There's always the DMCA. If people find out about it, or if it becomes widely known, like, oh my God, check out these things, it's amazing, then it's doing what it's supposed to do as far as people caring about it and it being worth doing. But that just leads me closer to being DMCA'd or something like, we're going to take all your websites down if you do not comply. And I have no recourse against that. It makes me not want to do that at all. So, go figure. It's the kind of thing where it's like, I'll tell you to go and get your own vinyl records and listen to those. Don't do them. Bus color question. None of the settings in bus colors are on any particular console, really. What's going on there is that they're based off of multiple convolution impulses over widely varying dynamic ranges of a bunch of hardware gear from somebody who wanted somebody to do the Nebula thing before anybody had actually done it. Because that idea existed before Nebula. And there were people who were making sets of convolutions at different volume levels. And they're like, somebody should do this. Can somebody do, here's a set of convolutions I made. I spent all day, and this is a Neve preamp, which became Lush and was Neverland back in the day. Here's a Neve preamp, and here is a whole set of convolution impulses from, like, you know, minus 60 to plus 30 dB, and that's where the bus color stuff comes from. Is this person being like, here's all of my huge set of convolution impulses, somebody please make this into a thing. And so I got the guy say so way back in the day, started putting that stuff together, and it is turned from his convolution impulses into a little set of basically algorithms that aren't his impulses anymore, but are sort of their own distinct things. That said, I'm more interested in making stuff that is more generalized rather than going off of essentially samples of stuff. I'd rather be like, okay, what makes this sound more silky? how does the high frequencies interact with dynamics and such? And if I can figure that out, I'll do it. Yeah, Baxendale is a kind of EQ curve, so it's a fairly general concept. That's an interesting off-topic question, Stephen. Stephen asks, when should I reach for capacitor? Actually, I'm going to take a moment to... Yep, there we go. Still got a preview. Somebody was calling out the 137. I decided I wanted to have that displayed at all times because that translates to what the Patreon is. I will do a number of hours of live stream. Granted, right now we're just Monday live stream, but when I do other live streams, it'll also go that way as well. And I will do that based on the number of thousands of dollars the Patreon gets. So, like, if you wanted me to do 2 hours, I get to $2,000 and I'm automatically doing it. And if I get close, well, I'll be doing more. You don't have to wait. It'll always be pegged to, and I'm rounding down, maybe I should round up. It'd be a difference of like 1 minute. It is rounding down the exact translation of what the Patreon sum currently is, translated into minutes. So the idea is that you should be able to see that, and rather than feeling like, oh no, time is ticking away, you feel like, you know, either look, everybody's abandoning the Patreon, so you're getting less time, or oh look, it's creeping upwards. That means Chris is doing better, and if I help Chris, then we can do even better. Because honestly, the way that I do this, especially since I'm doing many of these things starting at 11. It could get pretty stupid before it was causing a real problem with me schedule-wise. Like, technically, if it became a thing and I had enough to do, like I could start including, like, reviewing people's music or mixing stuff live and stream. There's any number of things I could be doing. I could go to many hours on that and still have stuff to do. You know, or song engineering, or I could mix songs for people, or I could analyze stuff that people have done. I would say talk to me about that, and we'll start building it into what I do. I'm not currently ready to do some things. I am, they would have to be on stream with me, because I'm not going to do mixing or mastering. Mastering especially is a weird concept. Without the person being able to give immediate feedback on where I'm taking things. Like, I'm not currently ready to do the make music while talking over it. And there are ways I could do that. Specifically, what I'm thinking of is I'd need to get a headset kind of thing where it's your sort of gamer thing. Maybe not so much headset either, because the thing is I listen over speakers. I wouldn't want to be just referencing headphones. It would be losing a lot of the fun of it. But I'd have to have a microphone set up going into USB. And it would have to be a pretty isolated microphone, because the thing is, I listen pretty loud while doing that stuff. So, I mean, I've gotten guitar feedback occasionally off the monitors when I had enough gain going on. So, on the one hand, I can run the mic into the board, which bakes the words I say into the music, which isn't necessarily what I want. The other option is running it into, like, extra USB input and have yet another audio interface going on top of everything else all at the same time. This, while most of my stuff is running at 96K, and be capturing dedicated audio that's going just only to OBS. So what would happen there is you'd have the you'd have the stream going onto YouTube, and YouTube would have talking over the music, and I'd be communicating with the chat, being able to say things over a mic. It might be a little screwed up because you'd be picking up the music over the mic as well. But you'd have that voice interaction going on, and we'd be having a conversation about this is what I'm doing and why. And also people would be asking me like, oh yeah, change the bass. Like the one comment that I've gotten in months of doing music on SoundCloud was something that's, why you not change the bass drum sound? Because I'm working on a million other things at the same time, and I like that bass drum sound, but that's the only comment I get, so it's like, yeah. But if I was running through a external interface that I could route to just only OBS, then I'd be able to do this thing, talk at times and explain what I'm doing, and then be capturing it the way that I normally capture it, and put it up on SoundCloud without the commentary. And that might be worthwhile because that'd be two things at once. It would be like, okay, here is the chatting about what's being done, and then you can also go later, check out the SoundCloud, and have the, yeah, that was basically the idea, Pix. And then later you'd be able to go to the SoundCloud and have the no commentary version at a higher fidelity level as well, because you can download 2496 off of SoundCloud. I pay them to let me do that because I'm generating several gigs of, every week that I do that, it's several gigs of space. And I'd be blowing up any server of my own very quickly doing that. But SoundCloud, you can put anything up there if you pay them. So yeah. Pre-ringing, yeah, that's why I don't like linear phase. There ain't no such thing as linear phase without pre-ringing. The whole concept of linear phase is that essentially the kernel that you wind up with is symmetrical. That's why it's linear phase. So it's sort of contradictory. Also, the steeper angle you produce, the farther out the tails of the impulse need to go. So if you have really dull slopes that aren't really sharp and focused, then you can have fairly non-blurred phase with fairly little pre-ringing. The sharper and sharper you get, the more intense the pre-ringing is going to become. Although it's interesting because some stuff like that that OSX thing, brick, that I use at times, is it renders incredibly slowly, because essentially if you're doing something like a brick wall, the farther you can stretch that out, the better off you are. And I'm pretty sure it can go to a point where it's like meaningless amounts of pre-ring. It's like you've got a brick wall filter, it's linear phase, it's going to have pre-ring. If the pre-ring is like 2 hours in length, then it's not even pre-ring, it's just a continuing sound. And the convolution kernel being used, it's gone into an entirely different zone entirely. Like the equivalent with a bandpass would be this incredibly tight sensor where only just the one frequency could get through, and then everything else was utterly and totally silent. And when you're dealing with stuff like that, there's no such thing as pre-ring. It's been turned into something else entirely. The issue with pre-ring and linear phase EQs is for gentler curves, where you do start picking up on the fact of like there is a pre-echo going on with sounds, and it becomes audible because it's happening at frequencies that we're concerned with and can hear easily. Yeah, the current chatter in our last 10-15 minutes or so is like David, if you join us on the game stream and start chattering in TeamSpeak, we're probably going to need to step on you from time to time. So be prepared for scolding or something. It'll be great to hear you. We probably all enjoy having your company as somebody on the voice chat, but there are things where if you go too bonkers, you'll be like, okay, breathe. Now, speaking of breathe, Ahmed was asking about this thing, which is a map to reach my home planet. No, it's not, but I'll tell you what it is, and I bet you'll find it just as exciting. This is a chart of what lights up on a digital clock. You can see I have my setup here. It's a modular synthesizer, and I have been thinking for a long time, like, what stuff could I do in order to make things, like, there are various things I'm thinking about, like I'd like to replace some of my envelope generators with a thing called Just Friends from Mannequins. Mannequins is another gloriously flaky module designer. They're fairly expensive, unfortunately, but it's a whole set of oscillators or curves or triggered things that are linked together in a peculiar way. And the guy has a very colorful way of describing everything. But it's capable of making low frequency waveforms and stuff, like gradual changes and stuff that overlaps and interferes with each other. I wondered whether maybe I could do something where you get a little scanner and get like some of that paper tape for cash registers and go like, okay, this is now my modular synthesizer controller. So this line represents the filter cutoff, and you go down the line, and then it would start reading slowly through it and assigning that setting to where it was on the line, meaning that you'd also have the visual display of like, look, here's this paper thing that is gradually progressing through, and you can look at what is about to come up in the mix, and it'll be represented by lines on the paper or spots or something like that. Also a little bit like a player piano, but long compositional things. But if you, here, I can even get into the pen and paper thing again. So I'm going to ask you to imagine something, and I don't think anybody's done this, although I'm surprised. They really should. It's obviously a good idea. I don't think anybody's stopping anybody from doing it, though. Here's a way to do something like this where you don't have to have the paper roll. What you have is a little digital clock. It's like 12 o'clock blinking with a little colon here. So what you do is you set up your digital clock and go, okay, here is the minutes, minutes column, hour column. So if it takes 10 minutes for this to go from like 0 to 9 and then increment this from 1 to 2, what changes in the LEDs? Different LEDs go on and off. Which ones? These ones. This is the cheat sheet. And it'll keep going forever. Basically, it matters as to what time you start actually doing the thing, because what time of day it is determines what things are going to be on and off. And it can extend even farther, but really you only need the minute section, because this is individual minutes turning on and off, and this is the 10-minute column turning on and off, and that already gives you stuff where you could figure out some compositional things, like for instance, if I'm not mistaken, it goes like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, unless it's some other arrangement. You can look that stuff up though. And these things are generally being illuminated by a combination of a driver that is sending voltage, and that's what you need for a synthesizer, is voltage. And then it's usually strobing through multiple ones and turning them on and off respectively, so you need to smooth it a little bit, but that's not hard because it's happening like at a very high rate, like beyond 1K or so. It's happening real fast. Each one of the lights is only on for part of the time, but it lights up good and bright. And when it does, your A LED, and we'll prop this up somewhere, your A LED will be on for, like, we'll look up here in the 10-minute section. It'll be on for the first minute, then it's off, on again for the next 2, off again, on again for like the next 3. The B one is going to be on for a while, then it's going to be off for 2 increments in a row, and then on again. So it'll go, and then it'll have this little space where it cuts out, and then it'll go. C, on the other hand, has 1 space where it cuts out, and it's in a different position from this one. D is turning off and on again on a regular basis. Not perfectly regular, but it's like off 1, on 2, off 1, on 2, off 1, on 2, and so on. And the reason I don't see it joining up in a particular way is because it's being concealed by how this is conjoined. Oh, no, wait. Okay, I have some kind of strange error here. I had to put this together in an alternative to Photoshop that I've got, but I did it wrong. It goes only to 8 rather than 9. These ones are the correct ones. So this one has a sort of on and off again behavior. This one has a on, off for a while, on again, off, on, and then sort of blinking a little bit. But it has this gap between it. So you can pick these particular ones by how they're going to behave. And as you can see, on the minute-by-minute thing, that's going to be repeating itself. But you can also take the tens column of the minutes, and that stretches everything out a really long time. But it's still going to be exactly the same pattern, because this is the pattern of 0 through 9. And it'll just keep cycling. Well, and technically it'll keep cycling. Maybe more study obviously is required, because it's like you got 0, 0, and it'll go through 9 to 1, but it's not going to go to like 11:99 o'clock. It'll go to 11:59 o'clock. And I think I've actually represented, no, I did represent that in this. See, this 10-minute section goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 3 hours long, and this is the pattern that you'd get. And it's relevant because it's going to be different from the 0 to 9. And you can look down along it to see which ones, or actually you can look down along it too, to see which ones are going to be more on or off, what's going to happen. Like this B1, second one down, stays on nearly all the time. And then when we hit just before the hour, the last 10 minutes before the hour, it's off. And then it's on again. So if I was going to do like an hour and 37 minutes, well, hey, check it out. An hour, 37 or so. I think I've got it set to 5. So tell you what, let's skip ahead. I'm folding it here. It takes you to 37. And notice something interesting about this. If you had stuff wired into these things so that you had a synthesizer, and you know, somebody should do a VCV rack of this. Seems doable. Why not? Somebody could program that. I don't know how to myself, but there's the guy. I was going to talk about this guy who wants to do GPL Airwindows plugins for VCV Rack. He should do something like this. It would be good. You'll notice that as we keep going through this, there's this one spot on the B column of the tens where it's a little hiatus. This is like, you could be like, okay, this is where the kick drum drops at, and we spend 10 minutes just floating around in space. And then it comes back in again. But you'll also notice that as you go to exactly 137, the last minute has these columns all off. So if you built stuff up where things are being turned on and off based on D, E, F, G lights, then you're going to have spaces where things sort of start replacing each other or kicking in or kicking out, and then periodically, every 10 minutes, on the 7th minute of the hour, those four mute for a minute. So you can do stuff like that. Or, similarly to what the Turing machine does, you can take voltages off of all these different things and say, this column represents 1 volt, this column represents a half volt, this column represents a quarter of a volt, and start making up a composite voltage out of bits by combining them in that way. And doing that means you get to do a varying, and the Turing machine kits give you stuff where you can do that in a couple of different ways. I've made notes about that because that's one of the things I need to get into, where you've got already an output on the Turing machine where it's using the bits in its little digital word that are like random on and off gates, and it builds it into a voltage, and the voltage is what I would be using. I'd be scaling it to get my random chord sequences going. But it also gives you a kind of output. The output is volts, which is essentially like a step sequencer, and it's running off of gates. Their pulses output is only a trigger output, but the volts output is a gates output, and it's just a non-standard ladder for a DAC. It gives a single output, and then you have these like 5 different little controls, and they tell you how much voltage you let through from any one of these positions in the DAC. So that'll give you a distinct but still repeating random voltage. And since it's analog gear, you can adjust it and hear what it's doing along the way, which is something I can tell you that the 2HP Turing machine does not do. I've got Turing machines doing, I'll be doing the demos of that stuff probably this coming Sunday. And what the 2HP version, which is a fairly cheaply available module, does is it just runs a computer, and the little inputs specify what the computer will do. So you have to wait for it to generate new voltages again. You have to let it generate new stuff and have the probability coming up with new things, and only then do you get remap values rather than being able to dial it up and down as you go. So yeah, so that is this map of my home planet that was being commented on. And again, this is something, you know, you shouldn't actually have to, like, this is a visual aid for figuring out which light is going to be lit at any given time. Looking at it and going like, okay, here's my clock. Here's 2 columns of the clock. You don't really have to worry about the hours column because it would take so long to change. But which of these is going to change and when? Do I plug into the jack which sends a voltage from this, or do I plug into the jack which sends a voltage from this? Well, you should be able to look it up. You'll be able to tell what does what at any given time. And again, Somebody should do that for VCV Rack. It would make perfect sense and be a very straightforward, direct thing. You can use the system clock to do it, assuming you can get a hold of the system clock from within VCV Rack. Yeah, so that will happen. This will happen in one way or another. I need to get what's basically about an $8 kit for building a little cheap digital clock, and then wire a whole bunch of stuff off of the back of that where it'll drive gates and drivers so that I can have actual modular voltages coming off of it, and like comparators so that it can be a really good ground or a really good like 10 volts or 8 volts or whatever it is I want it to be. And presumably like little lights, and possibly things like, for instance, you might want to have a pair of jacks where if the thing is lit up like it's in black, then the jacks are connected together, and if it's white, if it's off, then there's no connection to the jacks, and that becomes part of your mixing system. You patch stuff through that, or you patch triggers through that, which would be just as good. And then you have a mute system built into a clock so that stuff can go on and off without you doing anything about it. And you sort of compose the composition based on where you plug some of these things in and what you have turning on and off. And yeah, this is happening. Exactly how it's happening, I don't know, but I'm going to come up with something, even if it is just making the thing and having even one thing where I'm patching in and being like, okay, now this particular voltage is going to change at like, 50 to 59 minutes along. Because that would be super cool. That would be something where I could patch stuff into my modular synthesizer and know that whatever else I was doing, the synthesizer would start doing stuff on its own at certain times. And that is super interesting for me. And yeah, you don't have to it doesn't have to be a piano roll. That's just your reference chart for what's going to happen with your LEDs at any given time. I don't know. It's surely somebody has thought of that one before. If not, Merry Christmas. It's such a good idea. How could nobody have thought of this? I mean, the thing, it lights up lights, for heaven's sake. You could put CDS cells over the literal lights in the clock and use that. It's so possible. So we shall see around these things. But I have gone, as always, more minutes than I promised. So that's what I choose to do. And Bo, as far as software that does random composing, I've been looking into that for many, many years. I'll be talking about that more this coming Sunday, because this coming Sunday is probably a good time to jump into that firmware thing and stuff. I have a theory behind it. It's definitely sort of master's level work doing serious random composing. Even back in the day, you'd have people doing stuff that wasn't especially musical, but there are many approaches to that sort of thing. So yeah, let's see now. One final comment. Ahmed was talking about how VST's taken over mixing boards and this instruments, and now we have stuff that composes and that can mix, so basically we're done. No. What we do is we form bands. You form a band with the particular AI that you built, or something like that, in order to get a desired result. My whole idea behind this, that I will get back into, it's not going to happen instantly, but I will get back into it, is I need to make stuff where it'll come up with interesting, ingenious musical stuff that I can jam along with. And I'll plug my guitar in, I'll maybe have the guitar on the synthesizer, or I'll just have the guitar be a guitar. And I want stuff where I can just start wailing away lead solos and improvising along with the music that can not only throw out interesting ideas that are inspirational for me and go to places where my notes will want to go. Ideally, I want it listening to me. I want the AI listening to what I do in the solo so that it can either like go along or come up with something else. But that's the goal. That's the goal there. So it's not a matter of any of that stuff replacing you. It's a matter of like, what can we do together? What can I do combining what I already naturally do with what the computer can do or what it can bring together. That's also why I've gotten my drum kit back together, is I'd like to combine that with some of the synthetic stuff and track it all down together and then see if I can mix it in an interesting way. So, yeah. 2020 is going to be a year of digging into some of that stuff more, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. So, with that, I will say goodbye to you folks, as you say goodbye to each other. And I will say goodbye to you all. And I will catch up with you. You'll be hearing from me on Sunday, because of course you hear from me on Sunday. Anybody that wants to join me on Wednesday, we're not going to be talking about work, but I'll be doing that. We'll see what happens. It'll be for a longer period too, because we do like 3 hours or so. I'll go until it's time for bed. And I'll be back again next Monday, and we'll see what we can make about this. Also, if anybody wants me to listen to their music and critique it, which is one of the things I'd promised, we should work that into the Monday. So usually there's time. So get in touch with me, maybe on Patreon or something like that, and point me to the stuff that I can listen to and pitch me on it and be like, let's do this. And you could find that happening, because it's always good to have something interesting to talk about. With that, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.